Joining me now, Queensland Liberal Senator James McGrath. Great to see you, James. We'll kick off with United States politics, and then, of course, we'll get to domestic and China politics. What did you make of the US President's speech and the fact that he's now, it seems, albeit not very happy, accepting the result?
Well, I'm happy that he, as an Australian senator, I'm very happy that he's come to terms with what happened. I'm someone who supported his re-election, and I'm disappointed he's not going to be coming there for another 4 years. But it's important that American democracy moves on, and it's very important that President Trump moves on. But what we see from his speech today and what some other Republicans are doing, they're positioning themselves for the next battle. They're positioning themselves for the midterms in 2 years' time, and they're also positioning themselves for the next crack at the presidency in 4 years' time. But what it also showed is the importance of having, when you have a healthy democracy, your elections must not only be fair and transparent and accountable, they must be seen to be fair, transparent and accountable. And that's allowing scrutineers to go in and check the votes. Now, in America, they've got a lot of different voting systems. But here in Australia, you put your mark on the bit of paper, you number the bit of paper, it gets put in, and after 6 p.m, the officials, the Electoral Commission, counted, and they're checked by the scrutineers and the respective parties. We have one of the best, healthiest democracies around the world because of that accountability from all levels.
James, let's talk China. I thought that tweet earlier in the week was probably the most immature piece of international diplomacy I've probably ever witnessed. I never thought I'd see a day where a superpower like China would stoop to that degree. The Prime Minister suitably outraged, mixed messages from the Labor Party. What happens next?
You've got Albo flip-flopping all over the place like he's going on summer holidays. But what is really interesting is how strong the Prime Minister came out in relation to this tweet. I agree with you. A really immature tweet. You know, we're not talking university politics immaturity. We're talking kindergarten immaturity. This is one step away from picking up a packet of crayons and eating them to stop the kid beside you from using them to draw pictures. Yeah. When you come to geopolitics, you've got to have a level of seriousness, you've got to have a level of understanding that it is a rules-based order. But what China is doing, it's trying to be disruptive influence. We see what they've tried to do in the South Pacific. We see what they're trying to do in the broader sphere. And so that's why it's so important what Biden's National Security Advisor came out with in terms of saying they'll always stand by Australia. That's why it's so important that Prime Minister Morrison, the first person that the new Prime Minister of Japan met with was the Australian Prime Minister. So important. Do not underestimate that trip. And the PM, and he came out of quarantine in the last 24 hours. He was in quarantine for 2 weeks. And that's what he had to go through to make sure he can meet with that new PM in Japan. We've got to make sure Japan and Indonesia and India, the European Union, the UK, Canada, the Five Eyes are all lined up because they know that if Australia gets picked off by China, and that's what China's clearly trying to do, they're a bully. The Chinese government are trying to treat us like they treat their own people.
James, how do we deal with the escalating trade drama with obviously really important sort of exports like barley, wine, seafood, timber, all being affected by this particular stoush? And I mean, we can talk about diversifying away from China, which is, obviously an aim that we need to look at, but that's going to be a tough task, isn't it?
Oh, and the diversifying away from China isn't just going to happen tomorrow. We're talking about months and years in terms of our businesses and our industries being able to diversify away. So the government has a two-pronged approach here. The first is we are reaching out to the Chinese government. The ministers here in Australia are reaching out to their equivalents in China because we want to return to normal. We can have an economic relationship. We are both trading countries. It doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. But this goes back to the point I made earlier. The second part of our strategy is ensuring that as many countries as possible, from the States to Canada, the Five Eyes, the European Union, that we are as one. We are as one when it comes to dealing with China. And then we cannot allow one of us to be picked off and bullied. So that's why it's so important to have this coalition of the willing who believe in a rules-based order to stand together.
Senator McGrath, interestingly, today we saw David Crisafulli, the LNP opposition leader's response to the Queensland government budget. It was fairly predictable. I mean, he's going to obviously differentiate the LNP from the Labor Party, particularly around tackling debt and other visionary type projects. But I was interested in this story. The Greens, Michael Berkman and Amy McMahon, they want to propose that the unfettered power provided to Chief Medical Officer Dr Jeanette Young in Queensland be stripped away. Now, look, I was one of her harshest critics, and I believe that the medical research, the medical evidence that was provided to Premier Palaszczuk to close the borders and initiate lockdowns, I believe that should be made public. But I'm not quite sure that we should be stripping the person who introduces, you know, the regulations and protocols that keep us safe, that they should be stripped away.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. What is important here is that the politicians who make decisions based on the advice given to them by professionals like the Chief Health Officer, that they are held accountable. So what we saw over the last 6 months is that Palaszczuk has used Dr Young's advice to give herself an alibi for not making any decisions. We know Palaszczuk is just terrible at making decisions. I would be very reluctant for any senior public servant to have those powers stripped away from them. I think it's important we do have a parliamentary system where in different committees that the oppositions do have majorities, and sadly in Queensland that's not the case. It is effectively you've got an executive dictatorship for the next 4 years because Labor have a majority, it's a single house parliament, and they don't want any committees to have opposition majorities there. Compare that to the Senate, compare that to other parliaments around Australia. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of what the Greens are proposing there, but we do need to have more parliamentary accountability in Queensland as a principle.
Absolutely, there's no doubt at all about that. Well, James McGrath, Senator James McGrath, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your time, as usual.
Anytime. Thanks, Cleso. Toodaloo.